specifically wanted to ask you about the harvest in Greece. If you could, I was reading your wonderful, what you had to say in this book about participating in the olive oil harvest for the first time. And I wondered if you could just recount some of those memories of how the olive oil happens, a harvest happens in Greece, when it happens, and why Greeks might have a taste for this early harvest oil.
To the olive harvest in Greece basically starts in the fall, depending on where you are, where one is in the country. The further north, the later the harvest. In places like Crete, which is very far south and warmer, the harvest will start earlier. Typically, it starts sometime in October, and it's different for table olives than it is for oil olives. Table olives are harvested a little bit later. Oil olives are harvested over a period of months, starting with the very early part of the harvest, which is usually sometime in October, as I mentioned earlier. And those olives are the green, unripe olives. And there are many different varieties of oil olives in Greece. The most prevalent is the Koroneiki variety, but there are many others, Manaki and all sorts of other oil olives. And each of them has its own characteristic, but also characteristics that are a reflection of the landscape and the terrain and the microclimate and all those things that go into any agricultural product. The earlier olives produce an oil that we call aureleo, which is an early harvest olive oil, a green olive oil, an olive oil produced from green olives, from unripe olives. And that oil tends to be much higher in polyphenol. The polyphenol count is much higher. That is typically, in fact, there's now a trend in Greece in some places, and Crete is one of them. And there's some wonderful oils coming out of the mountainous areas of Crete, but also in parts of the Peloponnese and in Corfu and in a few other places where producers are really being very careful about the polyphenol count and taking good care to produce oils early in the season and selling them at a premium because they're more, you get less oil when the olive is unripe, but it's an acquired taste for many people, and not in Greece. In Greeks, the Greek palate is inured to bitterness and to sour tastes, much more so than the American palate. Our palate has been honed on sugar for a few generations that bitter is somehow, not embraced so fully. But it's very delicious oil, peppery and, has all sorts of different aromas and flavor components. And then later in the season, it's not as though the harvest happens sort of all at once. It's often gradual. So you're not harvesting an entire tree. You're harvesting what's ripe or ready for whatever oil you want to make on a particular tree. So the landscape is one of usually pretty rough terrain, often on terraces that are carved into slopes or mountainsides. So it's very hard to get farm equipment onto places like that. Most of the harvest is manual still to this day. There are a few quote unquote machines that they hold that kind of shake the branches a little bit. There's another technique where they cut the branches and there's a comb-like mechanism, so usually manually, that they just sort of rake the olives off the branches. So it depends from region to region and producer to producer. But the harvest goes on until sometimes, January. I mean, now things might be changing a little bit because nobody can predict the weather anymore, but that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's a very special time in Greece, especially in the countryside. And many people produce their own olive oil. I have 8 or 9 trees on my land here in Ikaria. And, I would love to produce my own oil. It would probably cost me 5 times as much, to do that than to buy really good oil. But it's something I want to do at some point.
I was surprised to read that the Greeks are the number one per capita consumers of olive oil. Would you talk about why that might be? How Greeks think about using olive oil? It might be different from how other countries use it.
Okay, Greeks are the number one consumers of olive oil in the world, and I think the number 3 producers. From what I remember, something like 90% of Greek olive oil is extra virgin. And of course, there are many different categories of extra virgin oil. I mean, it's a, sort of a wide open sea of quality and qualitative differences. But for Greeks, olive oil is a spiritual food as much as it is a source of nutrition. It's something that has always been part of this culture. When you get married in the Greek Orthodox Church, one of the parts of the marriage sacrament is may your home never be without bread, wine, and olive oil, because that's the foundation for a meal and for not being hungry. When children are baptized in the Greek Orthodox Church, they're anointed with olive oil. So it's a very, it's much more than a food. There's a beautiful icon from Mount Athos that I saw a replica of in the olive grove of a friend of mine. There's a small church on it. It's in the Peloponnese outside of Sparta. And it's the Virgin Mary of the olive groves, and it's a very rare icon. So there's a lot of cultural many cultural references and cultural innuendo in the whole idea of olive oil. We use olive oil to light the lamps in church as well. So it's just a really, it's much more than a food for us. But it's also, and again, this does have something to do a little bit with religion, but if you follow the Greek Orthodox fasting calendar, and many people still do, you're basically going off all animal products for half the year. 40 days before Easter, 40 days before Christmas, 2 weeks before August 15th, and then Wednesdays and Fridays, throughout the year, and then some other fasting periods. But some of those days during the fast are so strict that you're not supposed to even have olive oil. But for the majority of those days, you create these beautiful plant-based dishes that we call lavera. There's a whole category of recipes of dishes in the Greek kitchen called lavera. And that comes from the word for lavi, which is the word for oil, which by default refers to olive oil. And those are dishes that we eat throughout the year. They're always plant-based dishes, mostly done in a casserole, a stew pot, rare, sometimes in the oven, but mostly done on top of the stove. And those are dishes that are typically eaten during these fasting periods. So you have really wonderful dishes with legumes, you have chickpea stews and vegetable stews and casseroles and soups. And the olive oil is used in the beginning as a cooking fat, but also in the end as a garnish or as an additional flavor component. So it's always been, I also think, thinking about those dishes, I think that one of the reasons why Greek children eat vegetables so much more easily than my American friends' kids ever did is because the one thing that makes, so much plant-based cooking palatable is the fat content. And there is fat content in those dishes in Greece, but it's good fat, and it's also it's very comforting, and that food is cooked slowly. So even vegetables have the natural sugars in the vegetables have a chance to develop over the course of 2 hours of simmering. So there are little things like that that make that kind of food very palatable, even to a young person. And I think, yeah, I mean, everywhere you look in Greece, you see olive trees. You see olive trees growing on the sidewalks, in Athens. You see olive trees in everyone's backyard. I mean, it's so much a part of the culture. And there's a very famous poet, Odysseus Elitis, and I think one of his poems, he's a Nobel Prize-winning Greek poet, one of his poems talks about what you need to, if Greece were destroyed, you could rebuild it with a boat, a grapevine, and an olive tree. So it's, the sea, the vine, and the oil. So it's, the olive. So it's a very, very deep part of Greek culture and the cooking.
Beautiful answer. Would you talk a little bit about this, very pungent, bitter oil that is the early harvest oil? I think a lot of people think they don't like that kind of oil. What can chefs do to encourage people to embrace stronger flavored oils? Any culinary techniques that make it easier to appreciate that style?
These very pungent, peppery green oils from unripe olives, the agourelia, as we call them in Greek. To many people, that's an acquired taste. The bitterness is a little bit unexpected. The pepperiness, it burns the back of the throat, but that's an indication of all the good stuff that's in the oil, the polyphenols, and all the stuff that we like about olive oil. It might be an acquired taste to many Americans because our palates aren't honed on those flavors. If in a restaurant situation, there are some things that chefs can certainly do to educate their guests, their clients, their customers about these oils. One of them would be to create demand by making a tasting expensive. You always want what you can't have. Another thing would be to maybe just use them in, sparingly over certain things. So think about, what they would counterbalance. So maybe vegetables that are mild, things and earthy and have a kind of round and buttery flavor on their own. So things that the cabbage family cooked, bok choy, or I'm just thinking out loud here. Brussels sprouts too, but they're maybe a little bit strong. Vegetables that have a natural sweetness, maybe that would be counterbalanced by the pungency of an oil. Maybe in a dessert, I think that might be quite interesting. But I also think that people are more open now to different flavors. I mean, if you can create a demand for something as difficult as kimchi, I think that, you can create interest and demand for these very delicious, very healthy, pungent, peppery olive oils.
Can you give examples, plant-based examples preferably, of dishes that really shine because of that pungent olive oil? Be a specific dish that just really shows it off.
Some of the dishes in Greek cuisine that really show off these pungent oils are some of the simplest dishes. Things like just a simple boiled beet salad. If you're using great fresh beets that have that beautiful natural sweetness, and you drizzle a little of that peppery oil on top, and maybe some kind of garnish like crushed pistachios, or maybe some herbs. I love them just in sort of simple salads, like a Greek salad, or over horta. That would probably that's the one thing that maybe is most conducive to a drizzling of those oils. Those horta are the cooked greens. So even the bitter greens, so like a mustard green with a peppery oil, that would be really a burst of flavor. Or, some of the sweet greens, things like sorrel and some of the sweeter chicories, and even a spinach, just a cooked spinach, even a simple steamed spinach with a little bit of feta cheese and that one of those oils. I think you want to think about recipes that are simple and recipes that let the oil shine.
Do you keep other styles of oil in your kitchen? And if so, could you talk about how you use them? Do you keep a range of oils from different regions, oils of different flavors?
I keep a range of oils in my kitchen, a little bit by default, because I actually sell many of them online. So I keep, have a number of oils from different parts of the country. But I'm also interested in the different varieties of olives that are used to produce olive oils. So I will think about a dish, and I'm talking more like when you use oil as a garnish. So yes, I would use some of the rounder oils from the northern part of the Peloponnese, made with the Manaki variety of olive. Over maybe I would use something like that in a soup, like a chickpea soup. I can sort of see that working because they're both kind of mild. Some of the oils from Lesvos are also very interesting. The Peloponnese has all different types of oils depending on where you are. So the north is different from the oils around the Sparta, and those are different from the oils around Kalamata. And Crete is the same. It's big, and it produces a lot of olive oil. It's, a lot of it is very, very good, and it's different from place to place. And I do keep a workhorse oil in my kitchen, which is a perfectly fine oil. It's an good extra virgin olive oil. You're talking to somebody who goes through 25, liters a year just for me. So when there are 4 of us in the house, that's a lot of olive oil. So yeah, I'm very, loose with the olive oil. So I do keep, the workhorse olive oil is a very, very good oil. So it's not, and when I cook at home, I'm not as thoughtful. If I'm cooking for myself, I may not be as thoughtful about the oils that I'm using. If I'm cooking for a company or for, in a professional situation, I might think a little bit harder about, this has, this tastes of X, and maybe I need to think about a dish that it would be good with. We also use olive oil in baking.
Would you talk a little bit about that, the use of olive oil in baking? What particular, especially if there are any styles of olive oil that you associate with baked goods? And I'm not sure whether you mean sweet or savory. But.
No, I'm talking about sweets. We use olive oil in pastry and baking in the Greek kitchen as well. There are a lot of traditional recipes that call for olive oil. Some of them are Lenten sweets. One really well-known one is halva, which is there are many different versions of it, but the one that uses olive oil is a semolina-based version, and it's almost like a roux with semolina, and then you set it and you add things to it. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 part olive oil, 2 parts semolina, 3 parts sugar, 4 parts water. So you're making a syrup, and that goes over the semolina once it's set. And you can add things like orange zest and raisins and nuts, and saffron is very nice in there. So that's one dessert that's made with olive oil. We have all sorts of cookies, cakes. There's some wonderful cakes made with olive oil, a few vegan cakes that are actually very traditional. So, and I think there's also a trend now. I've seen, olive oil ice creams in Greece. I've seen all sorts of newer, kind of more creative pastry with olive oil.
If you let's fantasize a little bit. You're having a dinner party. All your guests are vegetarian. Can you walk us through what a menu might be, and what type of oil you might choose for each dish, if it's different?
I have to say, I think about some of the stuff that I do in my classes on Ikaria, because we focus a lot on plant-based food. And I actually have had many guests over the years who are vegetarian or vegan even, and some other dietary restrictions. But we do mostly plant-based cooking. A typical meal would be things like I would perhaps do a pie. So that's a use of olive oil in baking. And in that type of situation, I would probably use my workhorse oil to make the pastry, to make the phyllo dough, because I would do that with a homemade phyllo. And that is in a pound of flour, probably a half to 2/3 of a cup of extra virgin olive oil. Now, that's one place where you could use a more pungent oil and it would probably shine. And then we're also brushing each of those sheets of phyllo with olive oil before we bake them. We put the pie together, we cook all of the vegetables, and in my pies would include maybe 15 or 20 different greens and herbs, stuff that's available locally here in Ikaria. So things like lemon balm, poppy leaves, all sorts of wild greens, amaranth greens, mints, and things in the mint family, oregano, marjoram, wild fennel, dill, parsley, carrots that are grated, zucchini that's grated, maybe some winter squash if I have some in the freezer, lots of onions and leeks and other things in the onion family. And all of that goes into the filling. So it's very herbaceous and it's wonderfully complemented by the richness of the olive oil. So it's that combination of grassiness and fat that makes, and starch because we have the phyllos. So that would be kind of one of the centerpieces of a meal like that. With a greens pie, I might make a tzatziki or some kind of yogurt-based dip. Could be a traditional one. It could be a lot of places in Greece serve yogurt with these savory pies. So could be something I would use a mild vegetable, maybe a grated carrot or a cucumber. And there I could definitely see using a pungent oil because that's more of a garnish on top. You really taste the oil. And it's a very interesting play on textures because you have the fattiness from the yogurt and the fattiness from the olive oil. So the sharpness of the oil, which would I think shine. I would definitely serve some sort of fresh salad. So something like a palate cleanser kind of salad, maybe, just a beautiful tomato salad or tomato and maybe some feta cheese if I haven't put feta in the pie, or tomato, cucumber, and feta. And there, I would maybe think about using, there I think I would want the tomatoes to shine because there's nothing like a Greek tomato in summer. So I would use maybe one of the olive oils I like very much from the northern Peloponnese, which are made with the manaki olive. I might, depending on the pie filling, I might make a legume. So maybe maybe a filling like lentil salad or chickpea salad or black-eyed pea salad, which we eat a lot of in Ikaria. And the earthiness of those beans or those legumes, I think they're often enriched with a lot of fresh herbs. The palette of flavors in Greece gravitates more toward an herbal palette than a spice palette. And the herbal palettes, the variety of herbs that we use in cooking, I think work really well with all sorts of olive oils. But in, say, a dish like a black-eyed pea salad, which might have dill and maybe some vinegar and some onion, I would probably want to use a softer oil because the onion is sharp and maybe I'd add capers to that. So you don't want too much sharpness. So I think that's a meal. I mean, that's 4 dishes. Yeah.
Great answer. Lastly, just to wrap up, any more comments or guidance you might have for chefs about how to embrace a broader range of olive oils, why they should think more thoughtfully about the olive oil that they're using in their kitchens, and not just stop at one oil.
I think chefs should start to think about olive oil, maybe the way that we think about wine a little bit. Um, I'm not suggesting that restaurants should have an olive oil cellar with 500 different olive oil varieties, but I think it would be interesting to have olive oils, and also, of course, it depends on the restaurant. But say in a restaurant that serves some kind of range of cooking from the Mediterranean, you might want to have a range of oils from different regions, or in restaurants that focus on one cuisine, say a Greek restaurant, might be interesting to have olive oils from different parts of the country and to introduce people to different flavors of oils. There's also there's a story there. You can build dishes, you can build regional dishes around regional olive oils, and you can serve those with regional wines. So there's a way to make that whole experience more complex, in terms of flavor, deliciously complex, but also a richer dining experience. And we go out to eat to travel too. So in a way, it's a bit of vicarious traveling.